Okay, let's unpack this. Subway. Think about this. Back in 2011, they actually overtook McDonald's, became the biggest restaurant chain globally.
Globally, yeah.
And by 2019, more locations in the U.S. than even Starbucks. I mean, that's pretty staggering growth.
It really is. But, as you said, things got complicated.
Yeah, we saw store closures, and then, well, the whole Jared Fogle situation.
Yeah.
That cast a long shadow. It really shows how these external forces can just completely change a business's path, doesn't it?
It's fascinating, really, seeing how a company that looked almost untouchable can be so, well, vulnerable to changes in the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Subway's story is kind of a perfect example of why understanding that environment is just fundamental for any company that wants to stick around.
Absolutely, which is exactly what we're diving into today in this short take on strategy.
Yeah.
We're digging into the core ideas from Chapter 3 of Ketchen and Short's Mastering Strategic Management, the 4th edition. Think of this as your essential guide, understanding how the world outside a company really shapes its future, especially for those of you studying strategic management. This should give you a real leg up in seeing that bigger picture.
And connecting this back to your studies, right? Understanding these frameworks, it's not just about passing tests. It really gives you the tools to analyze any industry, whether it's restaurants like Subway or, tech or whatever field you end up in.
So in this short take, we're going to break down the general environment using PESTEL analysis. Then we'll zoom in a bit on the industry itself with Porter's 5 forces. And finally, we'll look at strategic groups, understanding the different ways companies compete within an industry. Ready to jump in?
Let's do it. So starting broad, the general environment, this is the big stuff, macro-level societal trends, events. Think social changes, tech advancements, demographics, the economy overall.
Right.
It's different from the industry environment, which is where companies are directly competing, offering similar things.
Okay, so general is the wide world, industry is the immediate playground. But why? Why is it so critical for companies to really track all this external stuff?
That's a key question. The textbook points out 3 main reasons. First, the environment is where you get your resources.
Resources, like?
Well, just like we need food and water, organizations need inputs. Things like labor, money, raw materials. For Subway, you think about their franchisees, that's capital and labor right there. Their suppliers bringing ingredients, and obviously their customers. They can't exist without that external support system.
Okay, that makes sense. Need the outside world just to function. What's number 2?
The second thing is the environment is where opportunities and threats come from.
Right, opportunities and threats. Define those a bit.
Sure. Opportunities are, external trends or events that could help a company improve, grow. Threats are the opposite, external things that could hurt their performance.
Gotcha. Any examples jump out?
Yeah, the book mentions chains like Salad Works or Noodles & Company as maybe potential threats to Subway, especially if people keep shifting towards healthier options, maybe. Or totally different field. Think about AI image generation. That's a huge threat to traditional stock photographers, right?
Definitely.
But there are opportunities too. Like after a natural disaster, there's suddenly huge demand for concrete building materials.
Okay.
Or during the pandemic, we saw that massive boom in home exercise gear because everyone was stuck inside.
It really shows how things are always shifting, always connected. So what's the third reason understanding the environment matters so much?
Third, the environment shapes the big strategic decisions leaders make. It kind of sets the boundaries. It influences whether they set high sales goals, decide to go into new countries, maybe acquire another company or launch a new product.
Right. Like you probably wouldn't set super ambitious sales targets if the economy's tanking.
Exactly. You have to base your strategy on what's actually happening out there.
Okay, so environment gives resources, brings opportunities and threats, and shapes strategy.
Okay.
Makes sense. Now, how do businesses actually, do this analysis? Systematically. That's where PESTEL comes in, right?
Yeah, precisely. PESTEL analysis is a really useful tool. Helps organize all these different factors in the general environment. It's an acronym. Political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal.
PESTEL.
Okay. And executives use it to basically scan each area. Look for those opportunities, spot the threats they need to worry about.
All right, let's break it down. P for political. What kind of things fall under that?
Political is mostly about the role of government, how it impacts business. So things like Tax policies, the book talks about the mortgage interest deduction affecting home builders, banks, realtors, trade rules, tariffs, how stable the government is. Even immigration policy can have big ripple effects, affecting labor costs for farmers, restaurants, demand for healthcare.
It's amazing how much government decisions touch. And the book mentioned how government efforts actually succeeded in cutting smoking rates. That's a powerful political influence example.
It's a great example, yeah. Shows how political action drives social change and then business change. Okay, moving to economic. What are we looking at here?
This is the money stuff, right? Interest rates, inflation, GDP, unemployment figures, how much spending money people have.
Yeah.
Just the general health of the economy. Growth or decline.
Exactly. Take interest rates. If they go up, borrowing gets expensive. That hits industries like housing, construction hard.
Right.
The textbook even has this scenario, like a home builder CEO thinking about cutting prices because rates are high. And that's where using big data analytics comes in, right? To figure out the best way to adjust prices in response.
Using data to make those calls. Smart. And we've definitely seen big economic events shake things up. The late 2000s crisis, for example, really hurt car sales.
Yeah, but also helped discount stores. And interestingly, cheaper restaurants like Subway did okay then too. And of course, the 2020 pandemic, huge economic impact. Some sectors got crushed. Others, like you mentioned with home fitness, just exploded.
Wild swings. Okay, this is for social. What kind of societal things are we talking about?
Social covers demographics, population size, age breakdowns, ethnic mix. The book had that fun fact about salsa overtaking ketchup sales as the U.S. Latino population grew and, tastes changed.
I remember that.
It also includes attitudes toward things like obesity, for instance, or consumer activism. Those are big social factors.
And the historical example was powerful too, women entering the workforce during WWII.
Yeah.
That caused long-term social shifts, creating new markets for things like business clothes, takeout meals.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's surprising things, like the book mentions rising obesity rates possibly impacting dude ranches needing bigger horses, maybe?
Wow, okay. Didn't see that coming.
Or busy lifestyles creating openings for mobile businesses like that custom tailor, brigands, even long-term stuff like falling birth rates that has huge implications down the road for the workforce.
So many angles. All right, next up is TCAP Technological. This is about innovation, yeah.
Exactly. Scientific advances, how fast new products get developed and adopted, automation, using tech to deliver services better. Moore's Law is the classic example here, right? Microchips getting more powerful, smaller.
Yeah, leading to things like smartphone cameras, basically killing off the separate digital camera market for most people.
Right. And things get adopted so much faster now. The internet hit 50 million users way quicker than TV or radio ever did. This creates huge opportunities, but also big threats, like we talked about with newspapers struggling against online news. Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post was an interesting attempt to bridge that gap.
Yeah, tech disruption.
And the textbook mentioned Grubhub buying Tapingo consolidation in food delivery tech. And a bit darker, AI making things like cybercrime easier to get into.
It really is a double-edged sword, isn't it? Okay, the second, environmental. What's this one cover? This is the natural world. Natural disasters, pollution, weather patterns, resource availability. The book used that Atlanta snowstorm example, how even a relatively minor weather event can cause major economic disruption.
Yeah. Unexpected things. And it mentioned AI potentially helping predict disasters, like that landslide in Papua New Guinea, using tech to understand environmental risks better.
And environmental awareness is a factor too, right?
Yeah.
Like concerns about tap water boosting bottled water sales.
Definitely. But then that creates its own issues, like plastic waste, which then creates opportunities for water filtration companies. It's often a cycle.
A cycle, yeah. Okay, last one. L for legal. What's key here?
Legal is about laws, regulations, court decisions, how they shape business. So employment law, health and safety rules, discrimination laws, antitrust stuff, intellectual property rights.
Right, like piracy being a huge issue for movies, software, especially in places like China, where the book notes it's tied up with social, economic, and tech factors.
Exactly. And legal changes can open doors, too, like China changing its one-child policy that could have long-term impacts on healthcare, kids' products, all sorts of things.
So PESTEL gives you that whole 360-degree view of the general environment, a way to scan the horizon for shifts that could hit any company, kind of like the stuff that hit Subway.
It's a really solid framework for getting your head around those big external forces.
Oh, okay, PESTEL. We've covered a lot there. Political, economic, social, tech, environmental, legal. It's all moving, all connected.
It really is. And just being aware of these dimensions is step one for any kind of effective strategy.
Talking about all these external forces.
Oh, dear.
What's up? Oh, no. I think a very unwelcome external event just happened. Right here. I seem to have spilled my entire coffee. Directly. In my lap.
Oh, no. Seriously. Are you okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Good.
Well, damp and suddenly less caffeinated. Hang on one second. Let me just sort this out. Wow. Talk about irony.
Yeah.
Discussing external forces. Short pause.
Oh.
I'm back. Slightly less comfortable, but ready to roll. Where were we?
Hi.
Right. We just finished PESTEL and the general environment.
Right. You are. So the general environment sets the stage, but the industry environment is where the direct competition really happens. And for analyzing that, we turn to Porter's 5 forces.
Porter's 5 forces. This is like strategy 101, isn't it?
Yeah.
What are the 5 forces it looks at again?
It really is fundamental. Porter's framework helps us figure out an industry's profit potential by looking at 5 key competitive pressures. Rivalry among the existing competitors, the threat of new companies coming in, the threat from substitute products or services, the bargaining power of suppliers, and the bargaining power of buyers.
Okay, let's tackle rivalry first. Rivalry among existing competitors. What makes that more intense?
So rivalry is just the direct fight between companies already in the game. It shows up as price wars, ad battles, new product launches, that sort of thing. It tends to heat up when the industry isn't growing much. Everyone's fighting over the same pie. High fixed costs can do it too. Companies need volume to cover those costs. If there isn't much difference between competitors' products, it often becomes about price. And high exit barriers, things that make it hard to leave the industry, financially or emotionally, can keep companies fighting even when it's tough.
The book mentioned industry concentration here too, fragmented versus concentrated. Can you explain that difference?
Sure. Concentration is just about how much market share is held by a few big players.
Yeah.
A concentrated industry, maybe like large aircraft manufacturing, has just a few dominant companies. Competition might be intense, but maybe less about slashing prices constantly.
Okay.
A fragmented industry like restaurants, even Subway, as a small piece overall, has tons of competitors. Rivalry there is usually much fiercer. The book mentioned Quiznos directly attacking Subway and ads, classic fragmented industry stuff.
Got it. Fragmented equals more players, usually more intense rivalry. Okay, next force. The threat of potential new entrants. How do newcomers shake things up?
New entrants are companies that could jump into the industry but aren't there yet. When they do enter, they obviously increase competition, bring more capacity, and that can push profits down for everyone already there. How likely they are to enter depends heavily on the barriers to entry.
Barriers to entry. So the obstacles keeping new folks out. What are some common ones?
Yeah, several big ones. Economies of scale, where big existing players have cost advantages just from being big. High capital requirements, just needing a ton of money to even start. Not being able to get access to distribution channels. Government policies might favor the incumbents. Strong brand loyalty for existing players, high switching costs for customers, existing companies threatening to retaliate hard, and sometimes existing companies just have cost advantages that aren't about size.
So high barriers are good for the companies already in the industry.
Yeah.
Keeps the competition down. The book mentioned AI maybe lowering barriers in some areas, like cybercrime, which is worrying,
Yeah.
but maybe also in restaurants with robots. And it made that link to Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, how the environment really shapes who succeeds.
Exactly. Even a great idea with lots of funding can struggle if the barriers to getting into that industry are just too high.
Okay, makes sense. Let's move to the third force, the threat of substitutes. What counts as a substitute here?
Substitutes are tricky. They're offerings from other industries that meet a similar need. Not direct competitors, but alternatives. Like Uber being a substitute for taxis.
Wow.
Or generic drugs for brand name ones. Strong substitutes limit how much an industry can charge, right? Because customers have other options.
And sometimes they're really disruptive, like cell phone cameras replacing digital cameras for most people. The pandemic example was interesting too. Baseball video games subbing for real baseball, home workouts for gyms.
Yeah, and that Impossible Foods CEO quote about plant-based meat replacing animal meat entirely, that's an extreme substitute prediction.
It really forces you to think outside your immediate industry box.
It does. And the textbook stresses you have to be clear how you define your industry. Is Subway in the sandwich business? Or the fast food business? Or the restaurant business? That definition changes what you see as a substitute.
Good point. Clarity matters. Okay, fourth force, power of suppliers. Who are they and how do they get power?
Suppliers provide the inputs, raw materials, parts, money, labor. For Subway, it's companies like Cisco bringing food, equipment, suppliers, their employees.
Right.
Suppliers have more power if their industry is more concentrated than the one they're selling to, if there aren't good substitutes for what they supply, if the industry needs their specific input, if it's expensive for companies to switch suppliers, if the supplier's product is really different, and if the supplier could realistically threaten to enter the industry themselves, become a competitor.
The book had examples like Sears fighting with Whirlpool way back, or Chick-fil-A suing chicken suppliers recently. But it also noted buyers can push back, like those Burger King franchisees forming a co-op to buy supplies together.
Exactly. It's all about that power balance in the relationship.
Which leads perfectly to the fifth force, power of buyers. Who are the buyers, and when do they have the upper hand?
Buyers are whoever purchases the industry's stuff. For Subway, it's us, individual people. For someone like Procter & Gamble, it's big retailers like Walmart or Target.
Okay.
Buyers have more power if there aren't many of them compared to sellers. If the industry's products are all pretty similar, making it easy to switch. If switching costs for the buyer are low, if the product they're buying is a big chunk of their costs, if the product isn't super critical to the buyer's own quality or price, and if the buyer could realistically threaten to make the product themselves, backward integration.
Walmart pushing suppliers for lower prices is the classic example, right?
Absolutely.
And the book mentioned people getting discounts on stigmatized houses, buyers having power there, or how car buyer power fluctuated wildly around the pandemic.
Yeah.
But then it also said college students have almost no power buying textbooks.
Right. A painful example for many students.
And buyers can team up too, like those pharmacy benefit managers merging to get more clout.
Exactly. Again, it's about who needs who more, who has more options.
So Porter's 5 forces, really useful for taking an industry apart and seeing where the competitive pressure points are, what the profit potential looks like. But the book did mention some limitations.
That's right. It's a powerful model, but maybe sometimes downplays collaboration. It can paint competition as purely zero-sum win-lose, but sometimes companies work together through alliances, partnerships, and that can actually grow the whole pie. Also, it can frame supplier and buyer relationships as purely adversarial, when often strong partnerships are key to success.
Good caveats to keep in mind. Okay, we've done the general environment with PESTEL, the industry with Porter's 5 forces. Last topic, strategic groups. What are those exactly?
Strategic groups are basically sets of companies within an industry that follow similar strategies. They compete in similar ways, maybe similar price points, quality levels, distribution, marketing, and they're different on those dimensions from other groups in the same industry.
So grouping competitors based on their strategic approach. Why is that useful to analyze?
Well, the textbook highlights 3 main benefits. First, it helps you pinpoint your closest rivals. Companies in your strategic group are usually your most direct competitors.
Makes sense. Subway versus other sandwich chains, not fancy restaurants.
Exactly. And the book mentions mobility barriers, things that make it hard to jump from one strategic group to another.
Okay, identify direct rivals. What's the second benefit?
Second, it can show you alternative ways to succeed. By looking at what strategies other groups are using, you might find different, maybe better approaches. The book used the example of mid-range restaurants adopting promotions during a recession, learning from the lower-priced chains.
Looking across groups for ideas. Interesting. And the third advantage?
Third, analyzing strategic groups can reveal untapped opportunities, gaps in the market that no current group is really serving well.
Like finding a niche.
Sort of. The book suggested maybe there's space for a chain that has both very high quality and a super diverse menu. Maybe Cheesecake Factory is close, but perhaps a Ruth's Chris could expand its menu. Though that has risks, of course.
So finding potential blue oceans within your industry by seeing where the current strategic clusters aren't. And the book briefly mentioned some research showing that your strategic group, along with your own company's strengths and the industry overall, all impact performance.
Exactly. It confirms that how you position yourself strategically within the industry landscape really matters for success.
Well, this has been quite the short take on strategy. We've covered the big picture with PESTEL, the industry competition with Porter's 5 forces, and the positioning within the industry using strategic groups. A lot of ground covered.
Absolutely. And for you listening, especially if you're studying strategic management, these frameworks are just invaluable tools. They give you a way to analyze any business, understand the forces shaping its success or failure, whether it's a giant like Subway or a tiny startup.
It definitely gives you a new lens to view the business world. So We really encourage you to take these ideas and apply them. Think about them in relation to industries you're interested in or maybe your future career path.
And that leads us to a final thought for you to chew on. Considering how fast things change today, technology, society, everything, how often do you think companies really need to go back and redo this kind of environmental analysis? What kind of event or signal should make them say, okay, time to take another look?